So, we've been looking at Genesis. We've been following the patriarch, Father Abraham, and his during the trials and tribulations, as he has set a path, in his life, based on his belief in only one God. We have last week saw his journey, and God, if we recall, gave him two promises, a promise of a son, and not only a son, but that his legacy would last through many generations, descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and then also a promise of land. And last week we took a look, and in chapter 20, it seems like he got a little chunk of land at a place called Beersheba. He gave all kinds of background to Beersheba. So that fulfills somewhat the land promise. And of course, what went along with that particular place, even though it wasn't like prime real estate or property, okay? It's down here, right on the edge, north edge of the Negev desert. Why would anyone want to settle there anyhow? Well, because there was like 7 springs. And that's the other thing that I pointed out. He won the water rights. And according to the scriptures, he won them because, according to Hebrew tradition, he dug a well there. Well, if there were springs there anyhow, why would he have to dig a well? Well, to claim the water rights. And he also planted a tree there. Remember what I said, the significance of planting a tree? Huh? Well, it's an indication of where water is, right? You know, it's on the edge of the desert. If you're out on the edge of a desert or crossing a desert, what do you look for? And what's the first sign that there's water somewhere? Vegetation, that's right. And if you Google this place, you'll find it's quite a significant place today. There's like over 100,000 people who live there. And of course, it's in the Bible, the extent of the land of Israel, it always said from Dan to Beersheba. And Dan, that's where one of the tribes of Israel settled, and that was the far northern region, right at basically the foot of Mount Hermon. Okay? Beersheba, this place, is the furthest southern extent of the Israelite empire. So, and their claim to that place is connected here with this tradition with Father Abraham. Now, right after that, the editors put into the place the birth of Isaac, and finally the promised son is fulfilled. So we looked at that last week. Isaac's birth. And of course, the promised son arrives. And, you know, and everyone's so happy they name him Isaac, which means God laughs, huh? We laugh. They're so giddy and happy and everything. But that doesn't last long. Because those women in his camp, Sarah and Hagar, they get into it again. And, what ticked off Sarah is she sees that son Ishmael, the son of Hagar, who was her maidservant, who she gave to Abraham to have a son with. Well, that boy is about 13, 14 years old now, and he's playing with Sarah's son, little Isaac, and evidently they're getting along pretty good. And so Sarah gets jealous and gets a bee in her bonnet, so to speak, and demands that Abraham cast out from their camp Hagar, who is identified as an Egyptian, and her son. So Abraham protests a little bit, but then he sends them on their way and roaming in the wilderness of Beersheba. So that not only is evidently on the path, on the road towards Egypt, but Abraham also knows a couple days' journey, and she will encounter water. And there's a little episode about Hagar and the water, and God speaking to her. What's interesting, I don't know if you noticed that, I want to make this point. So Sarah is the wife of Abraham, and she hasn't had children, for most of their married life and so on, right? And God speaks to Abraham over and over again, right? But God's message doesn't come to Hagar, to Sarah. But in that passage with Hagar, God speaks or sends his messenger and speaks to Hagar. Yeah. So that's kind of an interesting thing. You'd think it would be the opposite, but that's not the case. And what we're trying to do here is also point out this is not only the saga of the patriarchs, it's also saga of the matriarchs as well. We also took a look right after that. Father Abraham encounters again, second half of chapter 22, picking up on that thing about Beersheba. He makes, actually, it's 21, towards the end of 21. He makes a pact with a king of that region. And it's like, some say covenant, some say pact, some say contract, over the water rights at Beersheba. And that's all to concretize not only an explanation for the name of that place. Beersheba can mean the well of the seven. Shiva is seven, or well of an oath or contract. Okay? So, never mind this guy over here with this thing, okay? He's just doing his duty, We want to get publicized, right? Especially the food program, so that's what that's about. Okay, so again, this puts all things in order there. And I pointed out, it's interesting, at the end of this section, there's a new name for God. Chapter 21, verse 33. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba, and there he invoked by name the Lord God. This translation has the eternal. Is that what you have in other translations? Yahweh, the eternal. Everlasting. Okay. Same meaning, but what I want to point out actually is here's another like title or new name for God, right? So in Hebrew it became El Olam. No, to go with Elohim, El Shaddai, what else? We had another one. So all these become titles for the God of Abraham. All right. So the business about the pack at the well with the king and so on, that king Abimelech gives him permission also to settle where throughout that territory or that region. He also gave him all kinds of sheep and goats and gave male and female slaves because Abimelech almost took Sarah, Abraham's wife, as his wife. And so he tried to make up for that. And it also said Abraham got 1,000 shekels of silver. 1,000 shekels of silver. Did anyone look that up? I thought some of you guys that like, finances and money, you would look that up.
0.5 grams equals 1 shekel.
0.5 grams.
11.5 grams equals 1 shekel.
Equals 1 shekel, but how many grams of silver? Gram is a weight, okay? How much does 1 shekel weigh?
How much is it worth?
How much is it worth? How much is silver worth today?
$28.
Huh?
$28 an ounce.
I think it's higher than that, isn't it?
Not silver.
Well, you guys figure that out, right? Just the number, keep the number in mind because we're going to see how Father Abraham spent some of that. Okay, now, as we go towards chapter 23, we, 22. We're going to encounter something that could be kind of shocking. The testing of Abraham. Now, I want to give a little background on this. Biblical scholars point out that one of the things about monotheism, particularly this biblical monotheism with Father Abraham, there's always a strong theme or topic connected with it, and that is testing. It almost seems like testing faith is almost part of the theology of belief in only one God. In the Old Testament, for instance, believers are shown testing others, themselves, and God. They challenge God in the period of the Exodus. The famous, poem, antiphon that we pray every day in the liturgy of the hours. At the waters, and they tested me at the waters of Meribah and Massa, right? Okay, where they complained with Moses. They complained. We hate this food. We have no water. We want to go back to Egypt. Blah, 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 blah. It sounds like a bunch of whiny kids. Okay? Over and over, testing God. Okay? during the period of the conquest of the promised land. They bewailed when they encounter these little feudal kings, the Canaanite kings. They bewail the fact that they have no leader over and over. So God sends these judges to them, even a female judge. During the monarchy, they're testing God all the time as the kings of Israel make pacts, like Father Abraham did with King Abimelech, make pacts and contracts with other kings of Egypt or and other groups. The Israelite kings did, but that was a testing of their faith in only one God. So they were challenging, God on that. That's why God sent prophets to begin with, to kind of balance out checks and balances. And in wisdom literature, of course, the great iconic figure of testing is the book of, not Solomon, there's a whole book. Job, very good, yeah. Book of Job, that poor guy, his life tested over and over. So, this is as we look at chapter 22, we're actually going to start out with a footnote. And here in the New American Bible it says, God put Abraham to the test to prove the firmness of Abraham's faith in God's promise that through Isaac all the nations would find a blessing. And so it starts out, chapter 22, sometime after these events. That's almost like once upon a time. Okay? It's almost like once upon a time. In the days of, God put Abraham to the test. He called to Abraham, Abraham, ready. He replied, well, that's this translation. He replied, then God said, take your son Isaac, your only one, whom you love, go to the land of Moriah, and there you shall offer him up as a holocaust on a height that I will point out to you. It's like, what? After all these years being childless, after all these, adventures, after Abraham being faithful to God in face of the king, in face of the king of Egypt, in case of, Abimelech, after God, encountering God and bartering so that his son Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah is not destroyed, got destroyed anyhow, but at least Abraham tried, right? After all of this, and God holds out like a carrot in front of him. Oh yeah, you're going to have a son, and you're going to have descendants as numerous as the sands and the seashore and all that. And then, okay, so the kid is born, and he's about 12 years old, and all of a sudden God says, look, it's very sparing what God says, huh? The divine instruction: take your son Isaac, so that there's no doubt which son he's talking about, right? It's not Ishmael, right? Your only one, your only legitimate one, whom you love. You might, in your translation, might have your beloved. Go to Moriah, and you shall offer him as a holocaust. A holocaust. There's no doubt what God wanted. Holocaust was a burnt offering, where the offering is totally consumed. Now, there's evidence, just child sacrifice is pretty abhorrent to us, isn't it? Child sacrifice, we can't hardly think of it. Later on, in Deuteronomic law, you can find this in the book of Leviticus and also in early, I think in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 7 you find, it condemns the practice of child sacrifice. even though in the book of Judges, chapter 11, you find one of the judges, Jephthah, who sacrifices his daughter based on a vow that he had taken. Archaeologists have found an ancient Carthage, which is in North Africa. They have found evidence that there was a whole precinct in that ancient town for child sacrifice. And they have found the remains of burnt children in funeral urns in that precinct. Okay? So it was practiced amongst some ancient peoples. Why? You know, you can only guess. The other interesting thing is, take him to this height of Moriah. Now, this is the first time that this place is mentioned, and there's only one other place in the scriptures that it's mentioned, and that's in 2 Chronicles. I think it's chapter 31, verse 1. And in that connection is the site of Solomon's temple. The site of Solomon's temple. The place where the ancient Israelites will offer sacrifice to their God. And why would they choose, or why would Solomon, want to build, like his father David wanted to build a temple to Almighty God? Well, not only is it in the humps and bumps of hills of in and around what we know as Jerusalem today, that is it's not the highest. The Mount of Olives is the highest peak in that territory, but just a few hundred yards away today, where the Dome of the Rock is, and where the ancient Temple Mount was, or is, they understand that to have been this Mount Moriah. Why would Solomon want to do that? Well, because it goes back here to Father Abraham. That place, Moriah, is mentioned as the place where Abraham was tested, and there's sacrifice connected with it. But Abraham's faith was proven because he passed the test of Almighty God. And so it becomes truly a symbolic place, a setting, a sacred space, as Solomon in his wisdom perceives it. And it goes back to this story that was a part of their ancient heritage of Father Abraham being instructed. Now, what does Abraham say? God calls out to him, and even before God says what he wants Abraham to do, Abraham, in this translation, says ready. The second half of verse 3. What does your translation have?
What's the question again?
What was Abraham's response in your translation when God called him? Abraham?
Abraham,
In your translation, it is here I am. In this one, he just says ready. Ready, here I am. There's a song like that, right? Here I am. Right? Now you know where it came from, huh?
That's from Isaiah.
Where did Isaiah get it?
Oh, from Abraham.
From Abraham, maybe.
Singing the same song.
There's a Hebrew word that's translated differently in our translations. Okay, and in this verse 7 and verse 11, so 1, 7, and 11, this same word appears in Hebrew. Hinenai. Evidently, it's not easily translatable. But the connotation in Hebrew is attentiveness, readiness, willingness. It's a word that's not easily translated, as we can see in different translations of the Bible. It's either ready or here I am. In other places, it's going to be yes, yes, son, or yes, Lord, here I am. And so, what we have to understand is that the Hebrew word conveys Abraham's intent of his heart always to do whatever God wants him to do. Okay, and that's the key. So Abraham, who has entrusted his entire life up to this point on God's promises, he's directed his decisions on the part of his camp and his wife and everything on the basis of God's promises, on the basis that he will have a son with his wife Sarai, he will have descendants by her, and God will give them land. And now he just has like a toehold in the southern part of the land on the edge of a desert. It's sitting under a tamarisk tree, by some water wells at Beersheba. Now this son, this only son, God says, take him up on the high mountain and sacrifice him. But he's willing. If you look through up to this point, his faith in God has already been tested like 9 times. God, isn't that enough? Right? But here, the son of the promised son. And, for sure, at this point, the son's 12 years old, and Abraham was 100 when he had him. That's going to be it.
It's gonna be a trap.
I mean, they don't need any family planning after that. Nature is taking care of its course. Grandpa.
Well, Abraham's really in a tough situation. Isaac says, there's the fire and the wood and everything. Where's the ram? He doesn't answer him. He says, oh, God will provide.
God will provide. And what Maury is leading us to is to take a look at the instructions in verse 4. On the third day, Abraham caught sight from afar, and he said to his servants, well, you stay here with the donkey, and the boy and I will go up yonder, and we will worship and come back. And thereupon Abraham took the wood for the holocaust. He laid it on his son Isaac's shoulders, while he himself carried fire and the knife. And as they walked together, Isaac spoke to his father. And he said, Father. And Isaac said, or Abraham said, what?
Yes, sir.
Yes, son. You know what word that is in Hebrew? That word that's up there. Hinenai. Yeah, that was Abraham's response. And he replied, and Isaac continued, here on the fire, here is the wood. Well, where's the sheep for the holocaust? And son Abraham said, God himself will provide the sheep for the holocaust. Then the two continued going forward. And then it goes, if you would read this, of course you wouldn't read it to little kids, right?
Not the boys.
Even though there might be some times when you wish you could.
Put the fear of the Lord.
Okay. But it's a very dramatic story when you don't read through it like you're reading in a newspaper article. Sorry, guys. Okay. Catch the headlines, read 2 paragraphs. Okay, I'm done. I know what it's all about. My name is Donald Trump. Yeah. So, no, it's very dramatic after that. So he gets up there, and then they build the altar, he puts the wood on, and then he takes his son and ties him up. Now, the kid's about 12 or 13 years old, and he doesn't protest, he doesn't, right? Doesn't that strike you as strange? Or does it strike you as maybe in some way the father or the son was able to read the father's response when the father says, "Hineni," and the son kind of understands. But it goes in, and it's right up to that point where Abraham has that knife, and he's just ready to make the sacrifice. And then the angel holds him back. And what is the message from the angel as he stays his hand, so to speak? Verse 12, do not lay your hand on the boy, the messenger said. Do not do the least thing to him. Why? I know now how devoted you are to God, since you did not withhold from him your own beloved son. What does the other translations have there? That second half of New Jerusalem Bible, second half of verse 7.
You have not refused me your own beloved son.
You have not refused even your own. Why? I know now how the fear of God, or you have no fear of God? That you fear God. I know now that you fear God. This is that you are devoted to God. This New American Bible is kind of poor translation. The fear of God is used. And the term fear of God, or how devoted you are to God, indicates awe, reverence, and obedience. Abraham has passed the test. And so this section then will conclude verse 15. Again, the Lord's messenger called to Abraham from heaven and said, now this is after he found the ram, in the shrub, and he used the ram as a sacrifice. And Lord's messenger came and said, verse 15, I swear by myself. Well, if God is the Lord high God, who else is he going to swear by? Of course, that's a human way of expressing, an oath. Declares the Lord that because you acted as you did in not withholding from me your beloved son, I will bless you abundantly, make your descendants as countless as the stars of the sky and sands on the seashore. I think this is the first time that particular expression is used. Stars in the sky and sands in the seashore. And your descendants shall take possession of the gates of your enemies. Now this is kind of a different promise, isn't it? It's not just a promise of land. And in your descendants, all the nations of the earth will find blessing. All this because you obeyed my command. And then Abraham then returned to his servants. They set out together, and they went back to Beersheba, where Abraham has made his home. And that's like the editorial connection to the next story in the saga. Tom, what do you have to offer for us this morning?
It's Hebrews 11:17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had, I'll say it again, Hebrews 11:17, and he who received, I'll start over, I lost it. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who received the promise was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom he was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. By faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. By faith, Jacob...
Okay, stop right there.
I just got 1 second.
No, stop right there. Because, that reference, no, wait, no, Tom, no, Tom, okay, you get carried away sometimes. I hate to reveal that to everyone. But if you stop right there, what you pointed out to us, if Abraham and his sacrifice, even to the extent of his only begotten son, the ultimate sacrifice, which would take away not only the son in his presence, but also would eliminate, as that verse that Tom pointed out, Abraham's future. Because what other future would he have? Okay? So this story that we're looking at becomes a type, a model. And the fullness of that model is summed in the passage from Hebrew, when it's the understanding of the Christian community that Jesus Christ was God's only begotten Son. And it's in that same pattern. And God is willing to have his Son, Jesus, give his life here on earth so that all might be able to live in the future. And that's what the author of Hebrews is pointing out. He's pointing to this story then, and this episode, which is archetypical. It is a type, archetype, a first type, right?
Isaiah 53.
No. Hey.
I understand.
Yeah.
That's where it goes.
So thank you very much for that. Okay. Now, he goes back and this chapter ends with something. Sometime after that, there's that phrase again. News came to Abraham that Milcah too gave birth to sons to your brother Nahor. Okay. All of a sudden it pops up. Abraham has a brother Nahor. Where's that guy? We haven't heard him at all before. He had a nephew Lot, right? And then there's a mini genealogy here, mini genealogy of all kinds of strange names that we didn't hear before. And the reason why? This mini genealogy sets up as a bridge between Abraham and his family and the next story. Because when Isaac gets old enough, who's going to be a bride for him if he has to, back then, you take your bride within family connections, extended family connections. Who's going to be a bride for them? Abraham left his homeland. He left the land of Ur of the Chaldeans. He traveled, he's thousands of miles away. Where is he going to get a son for that? For a bride for it? This sets it up. There's many. Okay. But before we get to this point, we have to finish the saga of Sarah. Right.
Point, as you read this whole section about the Moriah and the 12-year-old boy, there's a lot left out. What 12-year-old boy would allow himself to be bound and put on an altar where there's to be a fire? I think we forget a lot of the drama. We just make the assumption that Abram followed God's request without ever asking anything. And I think that's an important part of this whole saga.
Well, those are all questions that us here in 21st century ask.
Yes.
Okay. What we have to consider, this story of Abraham and so on, the whole focus is about his giving up, willing to give up. The point of how strong is your faith in this one God? Based on dreams, visions, messengers, based on what? When all other cultures and all other societies at that time had multiple gods. Okay? And so it's the focus is on the testing of faith and Abraham's, passing the test. The details of the story and further, like questions, when the 12, 13-year-old kid, kind of fight the old man anyhow, because usually they do, irrelevant to what the whole meaning and purpose of the story is. Yes, dear.
That, I mean, look at ISIS kids today, how they're being led into, to kill people at a little bit, they're brainwashed completely.
Yeah.
And that's what they.
Okay.
But you also mentioned how many times Abraham was tested. And every time we're tested, we're at a different level. So by the time he got to the test of sacrificing his son, he had such a relationship with God that he just knew he could trust God.
Okay, Pat up here is pointing out that, as we said, Abraham was tested many times, and every time you're tested, you move to another level
And the son would see that.
of faith, of trust, of
Intimacy with God.
intimacy. Well, isn't that the same in any, even human relationships?
Right, today.
If you start a relationship, it might start off all, as fun and games and so on, but, until you have experienced sacrifice and together have worked through that sacrifice and made sacrifices for one another and so on, that love, that relationship, that connection has been tested. But you people who are married, you know what I mean, right? Okay? And then it moves you to another level in your relationship, another level, and it strengthens it. And if it doesn't strengthen it, one or the other becomes so weakened that they, give up on it in this day and age, unfortunately. Okay? So, now, in chapter 23, I wanted to, okay. Chapter 23, verses 1 and 2, and verses 19 and 20, it basically gives us the obit for Sarah. What we would call an obituary for Sarah. So, the span of Sarah's life was 127 years. She died in Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham performed the customary mourning rites for her. Now jump to 19. After this transaction, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Thus the field with its cave was transferred from the Hittites to Abraham as a burial place. Now, you cut out that verse 20, and, the first and second verses and the 19th verse, doesn't that almost sound like an obituary today? The only thing that's let out is, and she is survived by, and she was preceded in death by. But, let's face it, they moved away from their family, right? And they didn't have any other relatives. But, basically I see this as kind of an obit, for Sarah, right? And how old she is and all that. So, the wife dies, and it says that all of a sudden Abraham's at this place called Kiriath Arba, which is Hebron. I don't know exactly what the significance of this is, but take a look. Take a look. This whole story, what's going to happen? Abraham's going to buy a plot of land after negotiating, wheeling and dealing. We know what kind of a wheeler dealer he is, right? After wheeling and dealing, what's called the Hittites, which is anachronistic period. There were period's called the Hittites. They're ancient peoples. They came from Asia Minor, present-day Turkey, very deep culture. But the deep culture of the Hittites from Asia Minor date from about 1600 to about 1200 BC, which is after the time period of Father Abraham.
Oh,
Which is after the time period of Father Abraham. So that the reference that he's buying this land from Hittites is like historically anachronistic. But maybe it's just trying to say that, the final editors of this, if the final editors are like the priest or Deuteronomic historian from the 5th and 6th century BC, then he would be looking back and identifying the place and so on. But the other thing that I find as interesting here is the first place is Beersheba.
right.
If you know, one of the first things we teach kids is the numbers. Numbers, right? Well, when they're teaching Hebrew and Jewish kids today, numbers, Sheva is 7. Arba is 8. Okay?
Okay.
So, the first chunk of land or place that he has is Beersheba. A number, 7. And here, this is going to be a tract of land that he actually purchases. And it's a tract of land, and there's a cave on it, and there's trees on it, and so on. And it's not that close to Beersheba. And it's in, like, the promised land proper. And it's up in, the hill country. Hebron today, if you look it up, it's named the same thing today yet. It's about 25, 30 miles from Beersheba. It's right here, almost 2/3 of the way across from the Dead Sea. Not quite halfway between the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. It's up in the watershed, the hill country of the Judean hills. The cave of Mikphalah that he buries Sarah in, he will be buried in it. Isaac will be buried in it. Rebekah will be buried in it. Jacob will be buried in it.
Leah was the first one.
Jacob. Leah was the first one. Who was the second one? Rachel. Rachel is not buried here. Why is Rachel not buried here?
It was full.
It was full. Thank you very much. No, it's not that it was buried full. I'm testing your memory. Mike, do you know?
Yeah, Rachel was buried at Bethlehem because she died on the road while he was traveling.
In childbirth. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you travel in Israel between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, you'll come across a Jewish shrine, and they'll say that's the tomb of Rachel. And Mike's right. Later on in the patriarch narrative, she was, buried there on that road. Okay, this burial plot, and if you read, I don't want to go into it, but Abraham the wheeler dealer. It's very delightful, and he speaks with the head Hittite Ephron, before the city council, so to speak. And Abraham evidently has been hanging out here in Hebron, for a while, and because he's identified as a resident alien, verse 4. And then he left the side of his an alien among you. Sell me from your holdings a piece of property, my dear dead wife. And evidently he has fostered a good relationship even as a resident. And you know, he negotiated with this Ephron. It ends up being he buys, and there's trees on it, and there's other things, and he buys it for 400 shekels. How many shekels did he get from that other king as a gift? 1,000? Okay. How many shekels did he get from, you know, some more? So maybe, you know, they put this high price on this land because in other passages, who was it? Jeremiah, or one of the prophets, buys some land, and it's a lot less than that. Okay, but and he hangs on to it. But here, the opportunity that God's promise of land is going to be fulfilled, and it's the first time in the Bible that the first land that they get is a burial plot. The first land that they get in the promised land is a burial plot. And this land is done by commercial transaction between Father Abraham and this Hittite Ephron. And it's a very, very delightful, negotiations here. But it's significant, and the sacred burial grounds for Father Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their wives, even today. And it's even fought over yet today, as it has been through the centuries. And the last time there was fighting over it was just last week. November 5th, it was in the news, at Hebron. And it had to deal with fighting over the sanctuary, the mosque area that's built over what is now the cave. If you go on your Google up Hebron and the cave, you'll find the whole history. And it's very, very interesting. But what I am pointing out, what's significant for us, is this possession, a portion of the promised land, now fulfills the divine promise of land. And it stands as a pledge also for future possessions in the land in its entirety. And what is it? It's a burial place which is respected even today by all those who are descendants of the monotheism of Father Abraham that we looked at this morning, that was tested over and over and over again. Thank you very much. We'll see you in the winter show.
Wow. You always think it's so much
This product is